Well, hi everyone. I know, it's like cloudy and gross outside, and it's like really hard to be like enthusiastic about a lot today. But hi, thanks so much Jerry and DJPC for having me here. My name is Roshan. I am a man of many hats, I guess, but I'm here to talk to you about some of the work that I've done with climate solidarity work for Latin America, and the People's Climate Summits that I attended back in December of 2014 in Lima, Peru. A lot of you may know, actually, possibly some of you probably know more about Peru than even I do, but I spent 2 weeks there in December specifically to visit the region of Cajamarca, which is a region that is under siege basically by a company that's based here in Denver, Colorado, called Newmont Mining. And the fact that Newmont is our neighbor, that the people who are responsible for a lot of the things happening there live among us and attend our churches and have their children in our schools, puts a special onus and obligation on us to make sure that we're being good global neighbors to our brothers and sisters in Peru. And that is a lot of what drove me personally to participate in this climate summit. It was also a really awesome trip to go to Peru, so that was great.
So you went with a group, didn't you?
Yeah, so I went with a couple different groups. I was invited as a member of the Global Climate Convergence. The Global Climate Convergence is a coalition and network of climate activists here in the States primarily, but North America kind of broadly, and attempting to grow bigger. It's about 2 years old, and it was founded by Jill Stein, Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party, and Jill actually and I have been in networks, similar networks, since I was involved in a number of like Occupy protests here, and I was involved in Occupy Denver here, and like, you know how networking works. I got connected to Jill, and she invited me to come, and the Global Climate Convergence was co-sponsoring this delegation, this Climate Justice Solidarity delegation to Peru with a group called the Alliance for Global Justice. And AFGJ is based in Tucson, Arizona, but their primary focus is Latin American solidarity work and climate justice work. They're a wonderful group. They're both wonderful groups. I highly recommend you look up both of them. Alliance for Global Justice is afgj.org, and Global Climate Convergence is globalclimateconvergence.org. But I was invited as a sort of like youth delegate. I was one of the younger folks who was on the trip, and basically I don't have like a presentation. It's been a heck of a year for me already, so I put together some of the pictures that I have, and I have a few videos that are all of these are taken by me and shot by me down there in Peru. So I was going to just kind of walk you through how my trip went, and then linger on the global climate, the People's Climate Summit. But before that, I'll just kind of preface for those of you who don't know, the UN has been in the process of like a 20-year-long negotiation on what we're going to do about climate change. These talks are known as the COP talks. They're it's the Conference of Parties. I always forget what the C is, but I think it's the Conference of Parties. But it's basically world leaders who have gotten together under the umbrella of the UN to discuss creating some kind of global framework for how the international community will deal with and respond to climate change. And they've been happening for years, but these last couple of years have been really crucial because the final talk, which is going to be the one where they sign an agreement that will be this kind of new international regime of how the official state-centric international community will structure its agreements and establish this regime of how to deal with climate change. That final talk where they will all sign the agreement is happening this year in Paris in December. And I was in Peru on the occasion of the penultimate climate talk, the COP21, or I'm sorry, the COP20, the COP21 will be this year. And that talk was happening in Lima, Peru. Peru is widely agreed to be one of the countries, one of the states that is going to be the most impacted by climate change. Peru has over 92 microclimates, and because its terrain is so varied, it's right on the Pacific coast, and it has so much ecological diversity that stands to be lost, that the people from the UN who organize these kinds of things thought it was a very emblematic place to have the penultimate talk before they set these up. A lot of people who have been involved in climate justice work for a long time, and a lot of indigenous folks, a lot of people who are from some of the areas primarily impacted by climate change, have long ago written off the value of these talks in lots of ways. They are large governments that are in many cases already captured by capital and by moneyed interests in large international corporations, drawing lines and making agreements that seem nice and helpful, but in lots of ways are an extension of the neoliberal capitalist ideology of how we should solve problems by giving them over to the market and making market pressures deal with whatever kinds of real human issues we have. And a lot of the people that I was with, and granted I was with a very leftist group and hanging out with a lot of leftists, but a lot of people that I was hanging out with were in agreement that a lot of the talks that were happening in the official COP20 talks were basically worthless. A lot of this carbon trading sort of regime that has already been pretty well understood to be a key part of whatever the global climate framework will look like are essentially useless and in lots of ways just make things harder and continue to compound upon the disadvantage of global south countries and people who are already really being impacted by climate change. And there's a lot of problems with the talks. So in response to the problematicness and the sort of unhelpfulness for normal everyday people that the UN framework is offering, or has not been offering anyway, people from the grassroots, especially of the Global South, have been organizing for years to try to respond in their own ways to climate change and to building the political and popular power that's needed to respond to things like the UN's global climate framework and to really build movements and infrastructures and economies that will address the climate change problem at its source, which in lots of ways is our current economic arrangements and the way that our extractive economy operates and then pollutes. So I was there for that grassroots, grassroots movement's manifestation, which has been a sort of tradition now for years, where anywhere a UN global climate talk goes, a People's Summit will be sort of emerged and built. And so I was there. There we go. I was there for that Convergence. It was a 5-day gathering. People from literally all over the world who were coming together, who had been working on their own projects in their own countries. It was in Latin America, so it was obviously very heavily stacked by Latin American people, but there were folks from Africa, there were folks from Europe. I was there from America, and a lot of others were too. There were Australians, and there were fewer Pacific Islanders. It's just harder to get across the Atlantic, and the Pacific, and but there were still Pacific Islanders and Asians represented, and it was just amazing international global gathering of people really trying to push forward solutions. So I'll get to that, and that'll be the meat of what I talk about today. But first I just want to take you through the rest of the trip, because the rest of the trip was also pretty interesting to folks who have been involved with the DJPC for a while who know, and this is going to be really hard to do backwards. I'm just going to do this so that I can.
Put on the word so it doesn't have the clock in the picture.
Oh, sure.
We don't need to have
Yeah, that'll be fine.
somewhere there.
So many of you who have been involved in DJPC for a while know about the issues with Newmont and their mines in Cajamarca in Peru, and how Newmont is the largest one of the largest gold mining companies in the world, and the Yanacocha mine that they already operate in Peru is one of the largest in the world, and definitely the largest in the Western Hemisphere. So we went with the Alliance for Global Justice and Global Climate Convergence. Our delegation went to meet primarily, our trip was facilitated primarily by the political party that controls Cajamarca at this moment. Cajamarca is the region where the the Newmont mines are. And that political party is called MAS. MAS is an acronym for the Movimiento para Afirmación Social, which is the movement for social affirmation. And it's a leftist group in lots of ways, has communist tendencies, but that group has built popular power there in Cajamarca for years and actually now controls the government. And Cajamarca is essentially a state. I think they call them provinces in Peru. And Cajamarca is one of the only states that has a government, political power and party, or a party in power that actually opposes overtly mining activities on their land. So it was a really key group to be talking with and hosted by. And so this is just where it started. We flew in on December 12th, I think, and the first thing we did after we slept was meet with a group called Forum Solidaridad Peru, which is Solidarity Forum Peru, and let's see if that works. And then take a bus ride out to Cajamarca, which was 16 hours from Lima north. So these are just some pictures I took along the way. This is actually like just this is leaving Lima, but it's an interesting way to see some of the city and what it's like. This was just one of the, it was pointed out to me that this was a neighborhood that's technically legal, but a lot of the inequality in Peru has created slums essentially that look like this, where this place, this neighborhood that's on this hillside is actually really in danger of an avalanche, of a mudslide or a rock slide from up there, and it's actually happened before apparently. I don't know where to be out of everyone's way, so I'll just try to step back sometimes. But this neighborhood is just outside of the main downtown city of Peru, and is a product of the inequality there. And it's just something that I saw and I'll try to, there's a lot of pictures, so I'll try not to linger on too many, but this is also just around the corner, basically, from that neighborhood. This structure on the left here is a mall, like a huge mall. And that street there is kind of a market street. There's a lot of vendors. It was raining that day, so there were a lot of people out. But that's just, you can see the kind of extent of all of these neighborhoods, which are just kind of in this perpetual precarity and danger because the folks there can't afford to live in safer housing. This was this was actually a very interesting piece of art. Is there a better one? I think it's the blurry one, there's two. But that is a piece of indigenous art that harkens back to a lot of the tribal folks who used to control the territory that is now known as Peru before the Spaniards conquered it way back when, and was just a pretty thing that I saw on the bus ride up. So this is downtown Cajamarca. Cajamarca, the capital of Cajamarca is Cajamarca. So it's like New York, New York. But this is one of the main plazas. It's a really vibrant city. It's not, by our standards, huge, but it is pretty well developed as far as, and this is also at, they always told me in meters, so I was always confused as to exactly how high we were. But this is at about 6,000 feet. So this is in what you didn't see was the 16-hour bus ride that we took through really rough terrain. That's very much like driving through the Rockies, just these huge mountains that have a lot of beauty, but are also really hard to get things through. So the fact that there's a town so well developed, it's a very old town, it's really awesome. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry, with your hand on that. So this is downtown Cajamarca, and it's a city. I can't remember its exact population, but there's a lot of people who live there, and it's got one of the biggest population centers for that region. And this is you can see it here in the corner, this is the regional government building. It's basically like town hall or the capital for Cajamarca. And on the day that we arrived, there was a protest outside of the capital, and that's what all these people here are doing. They're gathered there to demand from the regional government that they do something about the threat that they face to their lives. It's just more that same gathering. But one of the biggest issues that's facing Cajamarca right now is that the mines that are in their territories basically impact the lakes that they depend on for their drinking water, for their, washing their clothes, for everything. A city can't exist without water. And as we have seen in California, it becomes really problematic when that water runs out. But the problem with Cajamarca is not that the water is running out, it's that it's being contaminated by the mines that are being implemented there in the region by Numa Mining. And so this was just a protest that was happening that day. And it's a really common sight because people stay mobilized there around the issues that are threatening their livelihoods and their ability to live where they are. So we have friends we had connections, our delegation was friendly with the ruling party there, MAS, and this was after we got inside. They're actually very interested to know that Americans support them, and while we were there, a number of us were asked, and especially since we had a presidential candidate with us, that was like a big deal for them, and they wanted to hear and sort of document the fact that people in America understand and know about them and their plights, and are doing what they can to support them here in the country. So this is a picture of when we were being interviewed by the party for basically, they're going to make a sort of promotional video for their party and just to continue the fight against Numa. And after that day, we spent kind of doing a bunch of media things with the party and just kind of getting the word out that Americans are here and they support the Peruvians. We went to this meeting of MAS and a bunch of their sort of compatriots. This was a gathering in a very humble space that they meet in because as developed as that area is for the region, it's still quite poor. And this was the gathering of my delegation and a number of people from MAS, and they have a really broad party based in teachers, workers, students, farmers, and people who are just kind of the salt of the earth, and really amazing, strong-willed people, and we were meeting with them basically the whole week. This is me and some of the leaders of the Cajamarcan Student Union. They have a union there. It's not a confusingly named building. It's a union for students, which I think we could learn a thing or two. This gentleman here is the president of the union, and they're actually a really important part of the political infrastructure there. Students and young people are actually seen as some of the sort of flag bearers of social movements, and it was just really awesome to meet some of them. They're super cool guys. They took me to get food. It was awesome. So this gentleman is, I just wanted to go, there's a picture I skipped over, but it's just this. This was a little stencil that you can, I don't know if any of you can see, but it says, for Peru, it says, for Peru, Conga no va, which is like, Conga won't go, Conga won't pass. And you see these little stencils and graffiti saying Conga no va, no, agua sí, oro no, which is water yes, gold no, all over the place. And so this was just one little instance that I captured. But the region is really faced with just that choice. Their choice is water or gold, and not both, because of the way that Numa operates there. So I took a picture of this because this is the president of the region. His name is, they call him Goyo. I actually have his name written down somewhere, but I forgot. Everyone just calls him Goyo. What is it? Gregorio. Gregorio, yeah. And Gregorio is the president of MAS and has been actually re-elected for his second term from prison. He was put in prison by the Peruvian government on basically false corruption charges. They accused him of these charges, and then they put him in prison immediately because they said that he was a flight risk. that they were saying that he was going to flee the country to avoid being held accountable for the crimes that he did not actually commit, but because a lot of the state of Peru is largely in support of the economic development that they get from these gold mines, the leader of the political power that actually opposes those is a huge threat to them. So they've put him in jail. He's been in jail for 2-3 years, and he's been essentially governing in absentia, and a lot of the people who work for the party are the kind of real power holders because he can't do a whole lot from jail. But that's Goyo, and I've heard he's great. This is really tangential, but like I'm an education activist really at heart and think that the empowerment of young people by society is a really key thing to anything working in the rest of our future. And this was something I took a picture of just to note that this is an ad for a private university. This is an ad for a for-profit university that is one of the sort of first wave of privatized higher education that's been coming into Peru. And like here in the United States, a lot of Latin America has been under attack by this kind of like neoliberal plan to undercut public funding for public education so that it starts to wane in its quality, and then to say, well, our education system's broken, we have to put in a business solution, right? A like market-based solution, and private for-profit colleges are, you know, part of that. Private for-profit schools and like high schools, middle schools are part of that here, but it's happening in Peru too. So I saw that billboard there in Cajamarca. That was kind of gross. So during the rest of the trip, we were only in Cajamarca for like 48 hours before we had to go back down to Lima. It was quite a journey. We went on a ride, basically in a bus, through the region that is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, Cajamarca is a beautiful mountainous region that people have been farming for centuries and have established a lot of culture and heritage, and it's a beautiful place that is really rich in natural resources. But the people there have been mostly peasant farmers for centuries. It's really wonderful that their way of life has survived for this long. But these are some of the shots that I took from the bus that we took, basically to travel through the region to see its beauty, but then to go to to visit two of the major mines that are there. There's one mine that's operating currently and has been for decades. It's called the Yanacocha mine. That's the one that a lot of people here in DJPC are probably most familiar with. And it has already had several human rights and health and environmental violations. They've spilled mercury into the water. They have, their private security forces have killed protesters who were protesting the contamination of their drinking water, and they have a lot of state protection, and it's just a huge problem. But we went out to Yanacocha on this trip, and then we went and sort of passed by the new site of what has been proposed as the second mega mine project. It's known as the Conga project. And Conga right now is being contested by the people of Cajamarca, and has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And in those protests, a number of people have been killed, and a lot of terrible things have happened. But we went out to just kind of see for ourselves what the land was like and what those people are in Cajamarca are there protecting, and also, you know, what it's like when the mine actually comes in. So this side's this private property, and you'll find these starting to be in a lot of places near where the mine has begun operation, the Yanacocha mine. And so I was just snapping things. And this was just a kind of dramatic shots. It's just, you know, for this trip took the whole day, and for like 2 and 3 hours we were just through these rolling, beautiful pastures and hillsides, and then you start to see these, like, off in the distance, these stripped hillsides, these things that have just been stripped of all of their surface and are being just kind of like brought down from the top. There probably used to be more mineral up here, but now it's down to here because they've been just scraping slowly in layers all of the earth away and processing it through heavy chemicals and just like really intensive process to basically get the gold. And I think there's also copper. But this was a really really interesting sign just because it points to, you can see it points to Kaga, and that's what it looks like. Just more of the beauty of that area through the west window. And this area specifically was one of the most gorgeous and is one of the most threatened. Selfie. How good do I look? Look at that. But this area is known as Lake Cochabamba. And I took a lot of pictures here because this is one of the areas that is directly under threats from the mine. The Conga project, if it were implemented successfully, would essentially drain this. Actually, I think I have a video of this mine or of this area, so I'm going to back out of this for a moment and show you that video because I think I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear me, so if we can't, that's okay. I'll just explain what I actually said. But here we go. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong one. No, stop. Too far. Sorry. That's in a moment. We'll get there. Look at this one.
This is the area called Cochabamba.
I said it wrong. It's Cochabamba.
This huge lake. The surrounding area is really rich in gold and resources. And this is the area that they would mine. They would drain this lake and dig it out from under to get the gold in these hills and destroy this beautiful land.
So that was just a little, videos, pictures don't do it justice, but at least you got a little panorama. I was like we got to take a little hike down into that lake region and go actually see for ourselves how gorgeous it was. And it was amazing, beautiful, and like I don't know if people could hear me in that video, but I was basically just saying, this area, there's gold under that lake. And they want to drain that lake, which is, this lake right here is one of the major sources of water for the region of Cajamarca. And without this, people would have to either rely on strictly bottled water that was imported from way down in the metropolitan areas of Peru, or die of thirst, or leave. So this lake was really significant, and the fact that we got to visit it was amazing. But yeah, and those hills are full of metals. So do I have more? Yeah. So these couple pictures are a sort of botched meeting. We tried to set up. It's really hard to communicate. This is a very rural area, and people are still just farming, and there's very little electricity. There's definitely no Wi-Fi. But these gentlemen here, this half of the picture is people from my delegation, but these three gentlemen here were ronderos, and ronderos are campesino or peasant farmer folks who have been organizing doing the very difficult work of organizing the hillside, the countryside, and the people who still live and farm and live off of the land there to defend themselves against that mine. And we were supposed to have a kind of longer meeting with these guys, but there were mixed messages and bad communication, and they didn't know we were coming. And when we got there, they were just kind of like, hello? But they knew we had some of the people from MAS who already had relationships with these specific gentlemen, and we got to have a conversation with them just about how we were there, to support their struggle, and it was really awesome and inspiring to meet these people because these are really simple people, but they are doing some of the most important work in the world, defending the land itself from northern aggression, essentially, and the countries of the west and the north, the global west and the global north, coming in to basically steal from their land and poison their way of life for that fact. So now you start to be able to see where we were getting to Yanacocha. We actually drove you. There's a road that you can take that kind of glances through the mine, the actual mine. You can't go into it's open pit, but it's also just this hill stripping. You can see, this is this right down here is actually a local farm, this area right here. I don't know what they grow, but this is a farm. And then this area right here is where they just started stripping the hillside methodically for gold. I think I know there's copper, and I think there is some silver, but it's largely gold that they get out of these hillsides. And someone's really trying to get hold of me. So this is just more pictures from the road. You can see that again, this is a hillside that's been stripped, and we're getting closer and closer to the mine. And I took pictures of this because it was just really amazing. The picture doesn't do it justice, but that's a truck that hauls earth. And if I stood next to that truck, I'm 6'1", and I would probably stand a little bit under halfway up that truck's tire. It's just this massive piece of machinery that's just kind of terrifying to like think of the scale of how much earth they move. And most of the earth they move is not actually valuable, is not gold. But they move it all around so that they can get at that tiny little portion. And this is what's called a tailing pond. This area right here, you can see is, it says, it's prohibited and like it's an operation point, but ooh, that's a really terrible picture. But you can kind of tell some of these like just toxified hillsides here are what's coming out of these ponds is, or what's going into them is basically the industrial waste of the process of mining, and they keep these tailings here, and this is actually one of the kinds of ponds that leaked into the actual water supply and contaminated, has already contaminated some of the Peruvian water, the Cajamarcan water with cyanide, which is just terrible. And I think, and this is just more of the actual mine that you can see. It's just, it's just devastating. It's so sad because you're in this beautiful area and you just see this complete, utter devastation.
How many tailing ponds are there?
I don't, but scores. You need a lot of water to mine for gold, and a lot of what they do is just kind of they use these tailing ponds to like get rid of the waste, and it's just storage of the waste until it evaporates or it goes back in the land. But this is the tailing pond.
Driving to this beautiful area for 2 hours of hills and mountains, and we're now in Yanacocha territory, and you can start to see where the hillside has just been stripped away and turned into a gold mine. This is the factory, the place where they process all the water filled with cyanide and other harmful chemicals from the earth to then recirculate. It's really ugly. There's just these terrible scars on the hillsides, the mountaintops. And over here, you can see just an example of one of the massive trucks that they need to haul this kind of stuff.
So yeah, just a little bit more of like a visual there. Let's keep going. So this was a lot of what we came just to see the actual mine and how it devastates the land up there. And then we went back, and we were done after that. After that trip, we went back to Lima because we had a lot of meetings with the political groups there to try to continue to foster relationships and build some sort of solidarity and find ways that we can support. And one of those ways was to connect with other Green parties. The Green Party is not just an American party that doesn't have standing to actually be elected most of the time. It's an international network, and there are Green parties all over the world. And we just so happened to be in town. The COP20 summit attracted a lot of international activists, and the Greens of Peru held an international gathering for Greens from all over Latin America, or the Americas, and we are part of the Americas. This is something I learned when I was down there, is that people in Latin America really take offense to people from the U.S. calling ourselves Americans as if we're the only ones, because America is a place with a couple dozen countries and not just one. But so this was the Green Party of the Americas gathering, and this is Jill here in the blue, which is probably a faux pas or something. But she. This was actually a bunch of these were all women who have been elected or who have run for presidential office in their respective countries under the Green Party banner. So that was a pretty awesome gathering. I mean, there was more than just the women, but that was them. And then so we also spent time visiting. This is a sideways picture, it's hard to look at, but this is the sort of like headquarters of MAS in Lima. They have they have their own building. It's beautiful. It's like centuries old sort of villa that has just their functioning headquarters. And sorry that like you have to turn and like hurt your neck to see that, but it's a really awesome space that they have. And this is a picture of some of the student movements that took place against the dictator of Peru back in the 90s, named Fujimori. They told me some really awesome pictures or stories that I won't have time to go into about those pictures, but it was really badass. That is one of the founders of MAS, again, a sideways picture, I'm sorry. But it's funny because this is actually one of the founders, and then this is one of the leaders currently of MAS. It's really awesome. One of the things, this gentleman, I can't remember the founder's name, but he was a huge writer, like many revolutionaries, and he started this paper called the Patria Roja, and I actually brought a couple copies that they gave to me, so I'll just have, you can start one here, and I'll start a couple over here. You can just pass these around as you like and take a look. I think they're almost all in Spanish, so sorry if you don't read Spanish. But a friend once told me recently, you should learn Spanish. This is America. So you really should learn Spanish if you don't know. And this is just a picture of like all of the different writings of the covers of the books that gentleman who founded MAS wrote. He was a prolific. I think one of those papers is actually in the show. I think it's that one. Yeah. And this was a talk forum that MAS hosted of international climate activists and human rights activists, just basically trying to continue to build the solidarity in the run-up to the climate summits, which was starting the next day, I think. Another thing that says Goyo says freedom now, or liberty now specifically, and Goyo for dignity. And so this, man, how many of these are like this?
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure, but like now is not really the time in the middle of the presentation. But this is, oh yeah, it's not even working. So, sorry, but this is the beginning of the pictures from the climate summit, which I want to spend more time on, because the climate summit was a really, sorry?
You didn't see that.
Oh, yeah, it says biodiversity, and this was the biodiversity tent. I'll stop like making you all sick by looking at that. But so the People's Climate Summit, or the Cumbre del Pueblo, was international gathering, like I was describing, of people from all over the country. There were over 4,000 people who attended, and the upside down pictures were pictures of the tent of biodiversity, where you can see all the biodiversity of Latin America and the rich biodiversity. And this is so cool. I'm sorry it's sideways, but this is a sort of like altar to the corn. These are all, every single piece, and there's like 4 or 5 sides of this, but there's a different species of corn on all of the different pieces of that little structure there, and it's kind of amazing how, and this is why, corn has been such a staple of the Americas food, but also specifically indigenous people's food for centuries and centuries and centuries. So it's really awesome that they had seeds.
Those arrows, I think, at the bottom.
I know, they're grayed out, and I don't know, it's like, yeah, it's all on the drive and not the actual computer, so. But this is just a picture of just like, this was like a slow point in the evening of one of the first days. But then there's a bunch of, there was like a big opening, and a bunch of these pictures that follow are from that opening. It's pretty interesting. They had, musical and cultural things from all over. Just gorgeous baby that I took a picture of with his father, who was from an indigenous group that was there to stand with the global climate fight. And people were waving their flags, and this is actually this flag here is like a sort of internationally recognized flag of indigenous peoples of South America. And that group right, like all along here, was all here with that group. And it was just really awesome, the diversity of people and places that were represented. This was a really moving, I'm so sorry that I don't have a video to show you this. This was a really moving Theater of the Oppressed performance that was an enactment of sort of how the climate has been destroyed, and basically the narrative was like these people were just trying to plant and farm and like feed their families and themselves. And then you can see this sign says Policia, which translates to police. And the police basically come and kill the farmers, but then they stand up and they keep farming, and eventually they like take the guns and the clubs from the police, and they like beat the police up and scare them away, and they win. But it was awesome. This huge thing, I didn't get a good picture of this, but this is like this huge piece of 3D arts that represented the world and like Mother Earth's contributions to us. I'll try to sit so people can actually see, because these next pictures are just going to talk a lot. This was the opening. There was just a series, a litany of different people and different groups who came out and sort of thanked people for being there and like expressed their gratitude for the climate summit in general. These two folks were campesinos from, I don't remember, but it was another Latin American country, and just more of them. What is that? La Via Campesina. Yeah, La Via Campesina is that's who those two people are representatives of. La Via Campesina is a huge international network of campesinos, and that's like the peasant farmers, that's kind of what they're called, in Latin America, who have been doing just amazing liberatory work in South America. I highly recommend that you Google La Via Campesina and find out more about what they're doing. That was an American, he was from a group that I respected, but I don't remember which one. This gentleman, also remember. This gentleman was really awesome. This guy, he is one of the leaders of a key Indigenous climate justice group here in North America. It's called the Indigenous Environmental Protection Network, I think. So it was really awesome to see that even Indigenous folks from what's now known as the United States are in solidarity with a lot of these Indigenous folks from Latin America. And some of the most exciting and important work, in my opinion, that's being done about climate change is the unification and sort of networking and joining of the fight by Indigenous folks, because in lots of ways the knowledge of how to run a successful society without the extractive and damaging sort of processes that our society runs is held by them, and we need to regain it. This young woman, actually both of these young women, the one in the white too, were students from Mexico. And they were there to participate in the climate struggle and link the movement of young people now, which they were a part of, for the missing Latin Americans or Mexican students called the Ayotzinapa 43. They were there to represent that struggle. That was really awesome that they were there. And I'm trying to find a video because it was a really moving demonstration during their speech. So what's happening here is that the entire crowd, they started a count. And it's become a big thing throughout Latin America to remember these missing students they number at 43, but they're always understood to be 43 of thousands who have just been disappeared by police and police impunity and police violence, and the state support of police violence is an international problem. That's one of the most important connections that I was sort of like interested in trying to follow and understand. And so yeah, they were super inspiring, and that count, it's just kind of a street chant now where people will count from 1 to 43 to remember those 43 students who were disappeared by the Mexican governments. That issue kept coming up. I went to Nicaragua, Mexico, and Peru all last year in 2014, and that was something that I heard from so many different people, was that police impunity the ability of police to kind of operate however they want to suppress and just openly kill people who are part of social movements for liberation and against, state power being used to do things like poison the water of people that they need. That issue of the police being able to do that with no recourse is a huge problem all over Latin America. And with the Black Lives Matter movement here, there's a really deep connection between those struggles and the way that police basically are never held accountable by the states, that they're the agents of state violence, but that they are never actually held to the standards of the law, which is so often upheld against climate activists who are doing things like jamming machinery or stopping mines because that's against the law. But then when the police break the law and just outright kill people with no due process and suppress free speech in the ways that they do all over the world, that's not held to the same standard. So that's a really important connection that I was interested to see, really disheartened and dismayed to see, but is there. And that's something that I really took away from it. These are just more of the people who came and spoke. And then this was an interesting thing that is just a kind of emblematic of how a lot of us don't see things. So this, I'll preface this and then I'll play this video. Just after that woman in the count, one of the people who was invited, and there's actually a big controversy, and this is an important lesson that I took, that, Latin America is just kind of this place over there, and these people who, are all alike or something in our minds, and this kind of imaginary of Americans or people from the United States. And they have their own diversity too. And one of the biggest controversies that I was able to detect, there's a lot of things happening that I couldn't understand, but one of the biggest controversies was that the cumbre, the summit, the People's Summit, was organized by a specific group of people, and there was a very politically significant decision made to allow people who were part of the government to come speak at and participate in the summit. So what I'm about to show is a video of what happened when the mayor of Lima came and spoke as part of the opening and the welcome, which actually ended up being one of the more controversial moments of the whole summit. So this is what happened. She just started talking. People shouting, "Assassin." Things just kind of stopped and people didn't know what to do for a while. That woman in the white is the mayor. She's saying, "I'm a representative of the people of Lima." But the kind of controversy, that's the exciting part. I was keeping the camera on it just in case these police and security guards started to beat them up, but they didn't. They actually handled the disruption very civilly, the security people did. But that is just a really interesting example of how even the movements in Latin America, as much solidarity and unity as there is divided amongst itself. And this sign, and what does this one say? Yeah, I don't remember what the rest of that sign said, but this one, and I think I was trying to get another one, I didn't get it. There was another one that said basically, but this sign says, "We want a summit of the people," and longer versions of that slogan said, "A summit of the people, not a summit of the government." And that was a really important tension that was there in the Cumbre del Pueblo, was the tension between the people and the grassroots doing things for themselves, and whether or not we were going to endorse or support or sort of cooperate with local municipal governments or larger governments, because the whole kind of dichotomy that had been set up in the city over that week of the summit was, you have the governments on one side who are bots and corrupt, and you have the people on the other side who are free and trying to be free and really struggling for what the people need, and the governments are often struggling for what the economy needs and what's good for the economy. So that was a really interesting tension that was present throughout the whole week, but that was probably one of its most succinct manifestations. And then this was another, just more dignitary speaking. And then it opened up into a really awesome Mexican band called, oh no, Calle 13. Yeah, Calle 13. And this was a really, they're popular here. And they're really badass, the rappers. And I speak Spanish, but I can't follow them. But yeah, it was really cool. This was, I didn't mean to let this in, but now that it's here, there is a park in Lima where basically this is in an upper middle class neighborhood, the Miraflores, and Miraflores is kind of understood to be this place where it's kind of gentrified, and the Latin American version of gentrified. There's a lot of young professionals who live there who apparently have a tendency of really liking kittens but not being so fond of cats. And so John F. Kennedy Park actually, there's another picture later that's really representative of this, but this park is full of stray cats. There's a couple hundred cats in this park, and this is the leader of the, this is the co-executive director of the Alliance for Global Justice, James Patrick Jordan, who's just a badass dude. But it's him posing, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a cat. Just there in the middle of this public park. This is the only, there's a picture later that I'll show you that has a cat in it, back at that park. But yeah, interesting side note. So on the second day of the summit, that was the first day. On the second day, the Cajamarcans actually came down from Cajamarca and from Salandin and from Bombamarca, which are all prefectures in that same region. They're all under threat by the Newmont mines. But they came, and waiting for them was a group that had been doing solidarity work with them. That was actually a Belgian group, very interestingly, who, and many of them were there's a lot of Belgians who live in Peru. Who knew? Globalization. But this, what you're looking at, this green thing, this is a huge city block wide sort of roundabout. There's just a really major intersection. There's just this big pretty plaza in the middle. But this is apparently, I was told, I've not looked into it, but I'm told it's the longest climate banner in the world. It is definitely longer than a city block, and you can't even get it all in one picture. But during the second day of the climate march, or the climate summits, the Cajamarcans and all the folks from that region came down via bus, and we were waiting for them, and then we were going to meet them in this plaza and then march into the summit, and with this huge banner. And they were late. They were hours late. And we were just kind of waiting around, and a lot of being in Latin America and anywhere in the global south is learning that your American version of time and promptness is wrong to them. I mean, it's it would be really nice if it was okay to be late for things. But they were late actually because they kept being stopped by police. They took 3 or 4 buses from that area and brought a lot of the political movement builders and leaders, and their bus was stopped several times. They had to get out and be searched several times. There were a few times where they thought they were going to be actually arrested, but they had been held up basically by the authorities, who do this sort of thing consistently to intimidate people who build movements there. They try to make sure that those people know and are very clear that they're being watched, and that at any moment they can be subject to arbitrary detention, beatings, or worse. And so we got to just kind of get really familiar with this banner while we waited for the Cajamarcans. And while we waited, these campesino ladies made this beautiful, this is all made out of soil from Cajamarca and plants that they brought down from Cajamarca. And it says, welcome, global, no. Oh yeah, thank you. But but it's, what's the, do you have any of those? Yes, globalized struggle, that's what it says. We will make the struggle global, yeah. So it was we'll globalize the struggle and welcome. And that's, you know, all of these amazing natural gifts from the earth that they made. And it took them like half an hour to build. And they had plenty of time because we were waiting. That was while we were, oh, I'm going the wrong way. I see. We changed the system, not the climate. And that's like a slogan down there in the system. So this was really interesting. I thought that things were about to get really rough here because this is a truck full of police. And actually, this was just a really interesting lesson. And that truck went by like moments before this scene, which is the Cajamarqueños had actually arrived, and they're finally coming down. Like all these people in the street here that's like a march full of a couple hundred people from Cajamarca. And that truck had just gone by, and then I noticed that like, oh, here they come. And we thought there was going to be a problem. But actually, in some of these pictures that follow, and they showed up in great fanfare, and it says, "We are a river," and not drugs. Yeah. And that says resistance pretty clearly. But these cops just started showing up and like lining up, and I thought that they were there to like confront us and stop the march from happening, but they were actually there to like steward the march and basically just stop traffic for us. This necklace is from Peru, and it's been slowly falling apart because it's just made from natural things. I just broke these. Anyway, this was a little rally that we had with the Cajamarqueños, and they did this really wonderful indigenous ceremony to kind of like bless the earth and you know, give thanks for safe passage and everything. And then what happened is like all of these people eventually like took a part of the banner and just like lifted up this huge like city blocks wide banner, and we had this march down the street like for probably like 15 blocks down to the place. That's Jill there. And this is when we had started actually moving the banner, and this is, you can see that it takes hundreds and hundreds of people to carry this banner, and it just takes up the whole street. But I was trying to document here with these police that they were just walking alongside and just like, we kept asking them to join the march, knowing that they wouldn't, but you know, kind of teasing them. And they were, I mean, like, I have had interactions with police during street demonstrations here in the United States, and these police were much nicer. I would greatly prefer Peruvian police to ours. But, you know, they're still cops. So these are some of the indigenous folks who gathered there with us at the march. And yeah, it's pretty. Okay, so now we are at the next day of the Cajamarca March was one march, and we did that, and that was the banners. There's a lot more pictures of like the banner flowing, but they're all just kind of boring after that. But this is just one way station of where people were gathering for the march of the actual People's Summit March. All of the summit started on Monday, ended on a Friday, but Wednesday there was no programming, there was only the march. And it was easily the largest mobilization I've ever been a part of. There were well over like 30,000 people who came into the streets for this march. We shut down a huge part of Lima, of the major like metropolitan city of Lima, for hours because we were gathering and marching. But this was just, these are just a few pictures of the march, and just people from literally all over Latin America standing up to say that they don't trust in, that they don't believe in the climate framework of the UN, and they want one that is run by people and not dominated by global corporate interests and the economy, the economic interests, like the one that we have now is. So these next few pictures are just of the march and that day, which was just super inspiring. That is a Colombian flag? Yeah.
Yes.
And then that's, I think these are Peruvian flags? Yeah. And these are some of the people from my delegation. Their signs in English that says "Change the U.S. climate toward Cuba, free the Cuban Five." This was in December, in like the middle of December, and basically like a week after we got back, this sign became like prophetic, because right after we got back was when Obama announced that we were changing the relations of the U.S. to Cuba. So that's really awesome. But a lot of the people that was there are super passionate supporters of Cuba as well. And they're awesome. This is the most disturbing thing I saw the entire time. So our gathering station was right outside of the Department of Defense of Peru. There's a picture of like a jet later, and actually one of the buildings in the background might have been the actual Department of Defense. But this picture, this is a billboard of a drone, and they're basically advertising defense technology, and this says, the drone, peace from the air, which is like just so chilling, because if you think about like what drones are used for in our country, it's not for peace. And I mean, they bring quiet after they're done working, but it's not really a friendly kind of thing.
Yeah, vigilance, vocation, and detection of danger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they find danger. And then and that's like one of the, this was, just this big military like altar outside of the Department of Defense, which is where we were gathering. It was just kind of gross. And that's the Department of Defense there, that big tall building. And this is one of our guides, the woman with glasses is Yanni, and she is a badass, and she is a leader, she's a youth leader inside of the Mosque Party, and her sign says, "We are women, not a market, or not a commodity." And that is an important part of what is driving a lot of things in Latin America is feminism. It's super great that they're there. That's a drone. That's the drone that was like surveilling the march. That's the only picture I think I got of it. So these next ones are just, a bunch of pictures of as they were going through the march. This guy was dressed up as a mythical creature from Latin American sort of folklore, and his sign says, "No to the contamination of rivers, and no to no la tala de bosques." Oh, no to the deforestation of the Amazon. Yeah. This was a really awesome group that I respected. I think a lot of these folks were anarchists, but it says, "We don't negotiate with state power or capital, and we organize against them." And it's basically, just more of that ethic of like a lot of people from popular social movements in Latin America see a lot of these, talks as basically negotiations among businesses and not among like people who actually represent the interests of normal folks like them. And these folks are great. Selfie! So there's just more of the march, more of the march. I mean, it was amazing. This is, Patria Roja is, the kind of one of the slogans, but this basically means like, Patria is basically like homeland. And red, or Roja is red, so these folks are, communists, which is cool. And this is one of the signs, Cumbre, summit of the people, not of the governments. And it says, all of us are Conga on the other side. So I mean, a lot of people, even from like the sort of mainland and like the metro, like lower areas of Peru, support the struggle against Newmont there in Cajamarca. More of the march. It was just massive and amazing and went on for a couple hours. Selfie again. Another one. And this was really interesting. Oh no, all of these are sideways too. So I was trying to get like a really good sense of like just how many people were flowing past this, because this is actually the Supreme Court of Peru, which has done a lot to support and sort of twist the laws, very much like our Supreme Court, in favor of large international corporations plundering their and then this is the end of the march, and you can see that we got a very warm welcome from these police who were all just lined up to basically keep us in our place. And we filled up this huge plaza of folks, and there was like another concert and everything, but we were just exhausted and hot and thirsty and hungry, so we went for lunch. But this, you saw these signs everywhere in downtown Lima, and it says COP20 nest of predators. And that depiction there is, you know, this capitalist kind of like grabbing for the earth, and he's polluting it, and it's on fire, and it's warming, and all these things. But this is a kind of a lot of sentiment that you see there in Peru expressed in the streets. And so this was the other picture of cats. I'm sorry, it's sideways again, but you can see that like what's happening now is that we like the big march happened, and it was still totally like, you know, in the middle of the day by the time we were over, by the time we were done. And so we gathered here with the young people. And this was actually one of the most interesting parts of my whole trip. Was that after the main march that was organized by the Cumbre, these young people had called for their own sort of youth march. And this was largely driven by students from Lima who wanted to sort of assert the importance and sort of primacy of young people in this movement. And they're very much like in America, in Peru, the young people and the older sort of like standard bearers of the movement sort of see things differently. And so this was actually super interesting because this was, oh hey, look, it's Irene. That's Irene. She was going to be here, but she's sick today. But Irene was there too, and she was actually had a press pass, and so she was in the summit. She would have told you a lot of different things. But this was the march of the young people. And basically the picture, the reason that it's important to see this picture of the cats is because you can see there's also police back here who were lining up, and we had gotten back into the cat park, which was in Miraflores, and this march was kind of like controversial because a lot of people in the like main organization had rejected it and said that we couldn't do this is too like, you know, provocative, and we were definitely going to provoke the police. And that's why the police had already started lining up in the park because the word had gotten out that we were going to march starting from Miraflores in the cat park. And so this actually is a picture of the gathering that was sort of like the impromptu assembly and decision-making process that we held, where a bunch of people basically debated whether or not we should actually have this march because we were pretty sure that the cops were going to like crack down and basically immediately after we left the park. And a bunch of people made really impassioned speeches about why we should, and then we did. And actually there's a couple interesting videos from this, because what was important about this is that we, this group of young people thought it was super important to go to the other summit that was happening. There were two summits. The UN all gathered in Lima, and the representatives of the nations came. But then there was also another summit of the Global Corporate Summit, where 500 corporations of the largest international corporations also gathered in Lima. But that doesn't influence, the UN talks. That had nothing to do with them. They were separate, right? Yeah, exactly. So that's actually why the March of the Young People was so controversial, because they were marching on that summit. And whereas the other summit marched to the UN, marched past it, kind of. These folks wanted to go straight to the summit. It was called the World Climate Summit instead of the UN Climate Summit, and because corporations represent the world, right? But so I'm just going to show you the video of just some of what the rowdy street march that we had to that march looked, or to that place looked like. Not a good video, sorry. So it was easily a few hundred, it was probably close to 1,000 folks who these young people had organized to come on this march. And this is through a really major downtown part of Miraflores, that sort of gentrifying area. But that was really interesting because how convenient was it that, I'm going to show a picture before I say the next thing. So this is where we were stopped basically a block from the actual corporate summits, and we could see the hotel they were gathering in, and there were a huge wall of cops outside of it, but they had stopped us a block away because we were on this really narrow street that shared like a block away from the corporate summit was also the National Police Headquarters. And that is just where we kind of got like boxed in on the streets, and we were between like a wall of police and then more buildings on the other side, and then the police headquarters. And we had this sort of impromptu General Assembly, and people were making speeches about the dominance of the corporations and how this is where the real predators are, and this is where the real decisions are being made. And this is the march that young people held that was kind of like poo-pooed and like not really supported by the organizers of the like main summit. So it's just a really interesting way to see some of the continued generational gaps in Latin America, and this is just a wall of those police and more of that that gathering. We're still there in the street, and that building's still the headquarters. And it really kind of got tense for a while. It sort of seemed like the cops were gonna march on us, but actually what happened was just that we held this, these people right here are looking just off screen to a little, that was one of my favorite signs. It says capitalism. You can see the rest. But there was just this kind of impromptu sort of speech-making area, and we all had this kind of, the press was there and they were watching, and it was pretty interesting.
Can you tell us about press coverage? Was there any,
So yeah, I mean, press were everywhere, and this building was this is the front door of the corporate summit. And these are the cops who were standing in our way. So what was the press coverage like? I mean, there were press kind of everywhere, and a lot of that, I mean, like, actually there in that little alley, I ended up talking with a couple people from Democracy Now! There was like, that was the only American news station I saw there. Tell you something about where to get your news. But and Amy Goodman was there, and we almost met her because I was with Jill Stein. I was just like, hey, do you want to talk to my friend Jill and maybe take me with you to go meet Amy Goodman? And it didn't happen. But a lot of the press there were kind of like ours. I mean, like, people there don't trust their media that much either, and a lot of times they tell the kind of like mainstream, pro-states, pro-economy message, and a lot of folks there have, like us, taken to the internet to get a lot of their like real news, and like sort of less biased, or at least like more diverse opinions. So that's a little bit of what I saw about the press. I mean, but I also wasn't watching too much TV, and it didn't come up a whole lot over the gathering.
I don't think the police would attack because it's an international event.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of it.
They attack people all the time in Peru, but I think
right, they attack
it's rare
Peruvians.
that they would attack an international.
Right, and that was something that that was also really clear when I was in Nicaragua. Like, we were assigned, there was 2 Americans. I was one, or two people from the U.S., and we were assigned our own like sort of person who was like our caretaker. And we realized that like halfway through the gathering was because if we got arrested or got attacked or anything happened to us, it was a way bigger deal than if someone else. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that KGNU was there.
Right, of course, yeah. Irene was there. And KGNU, your friendly local community-run radio station here in the Front Range, was there covering it. They totally had coverage. They had a live reporter. And so some of these are just the rest of the gatherings. I just want to like open up for questions. These were. This was really awesome, though. I'll just say 2 more things. This gentleman right here, the like large black man sitting, is Kali Akuno, who is one of the key people from a really awesome movement that y'all should check out here in the States. He's one of the like leaders of a group called Cooperate Jackson. And Cooperate Jackson is part of this big network, like the Global Grassroots Justice Campaign or something along those lines. And Cooperate Jackson is based in Jackson, Mississippi, and they are building local solidarity economy that's based on cooperation and solidarity and sharing rather than competition and profits and destruction. Wow. And they are part of a network of 5 American cities that are trying to basically launch a real and sustainable alternative economy that's parallel to the extractive, destructive, death-bringing economy. And Cooperate Jackson is just really awesome, and I took a picture because I was listening to his panel. That was where I first learned about their work, and I've tried to connect, and like we're going to do something hopefully Woodbine, the organization I work for now, will connect, and they're just really awesome. And this was a really, really amazing education organization that I also was just super fond of. The Council of Popular Education for Latin America and the Caribbean, CEAL, which kind of has a reference to like heaven in it. But yeah, they were really awesome too, but I don't have too much more to say about them. And this was the closing. It says, 10th of December, change the system, not the climate. And this woman, I took a picture of her because I saw her everywhere, and she actually was getting an award for being like one of the key people of the whole summit, of pulling the whole thing together. And she couldn't have been more than like, I just turned 28, she couldn't have been older than me. And I've forgotten her name, but she was like specifically honored in front of everyone at the last part of the summit for having made so much happen. So while there is this kind of like disconnect among some of like the ideology of the young people and the sort of like older folks, it's still, young people are absolutely crucial to the movement's functioning. And this young woman was just super awesome and made a lot of it happen. And then this is the closing of the summits. This is the one from Africa who's also really crucial in organizing there, and I forget which country she's from. This was also long ago, I forgot a lot of details. But this was just a lot of the folks who were the organizers and who made it happen, kind of being honored. This says hip hop block, which is just a really interesting like tangent. And I'm about to end here because I think I'm almost done. But this was just cool because this was a flyer that was being passed out at the Youth March, where basically hip hop is an international phenomenon. And a lot of folks have used it. Hip hop started as a political social movement, and in lots of ways has been commodified, like so many things in our world, to make money off of people's cultures. But this was just a really interesting thing to me because I have worked with some people who use hip hop as an organizing tool and a cultural movement building tool, and it's down there too. Lunch, Yanni's talking. This is one more of me and some of the key students there in the headquarters of MAS on the last day that we were there. And this was a beautiful fountain in Miraflores that has like sort of like a Central American like solidarity, like we love Central America. It's a representation of Central America there. The fountain, when it's on, is beautiful. And that's like, it's got a plaza of a lot of the different like Central American countries and flags. And I think, yep, that's it.
Great.
So that is a lot of like how my trip went, and a lot of the lessons hopefully came out there. But now I guess I'll just open it up for like discussion.
So, back to the climate change in Peru.
Yeah, I've talked plenty. So if you all have input, comments, questions, anything you want to say about what you heard? Or
One thing I want to comment on, because you had brought it up with the kind of new kind of economy. In Latin America, they call it economía solidaria. Mm-hmm. It's solidarity economy, and there is an international network and conventions being held so that you can actually stop the competitive economics and just do cooperative or almost bartering or like cooperatives that we live on and things like that. A different kind of economy than what we're getting. And we're starting a grassroots movement in Latin America called Economía Solidaria.
Right. Yeah, and it's a lot of groups like that were actually represented and like having some of those interesting talks there at the Cumbre del Pueblo, because that is a really important part, like we can, shut down coal plants and have renewable energy all we want, but like as long as there is an economy that's based on things like building, like taking minerals out of, like most of the things that are in this room were made out of something that came out of the ground or grew out of the earth, and until we learn to have an economy that's not based on simply taking more and more of those things out of the earth, we are going to have a bigger problem than just coal.
Is there follow-up planned?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the same
Whatever
question.
results at the end of the People Summit?
Yes, thank you for asking.
Before the next.
Yeah, because that's actually something I really wanted to get to, and actually I have a little it's at one of the last meetings. So during the Cumbre, I went to one of the international gatherings that was like specifically for people who were international from Peru, or than like outside of Peru. And there is a whole, the global climate movements is definitely aiming at Paris right now. And there are a number of sort of like intermediary days of action over this year, especially this summer and into the fall, that are leading up to and gearing up for the Paris COP21, which is the final gathering of the UN Summit that's sort of signed the agreement. And there are so many things happening in between now and then. It's kind of hard to like get a hold of, but some of the bigger things were from March 24th to the 28th was the World Social Forum in Tunisia, which is this really awesome gathering of social movements from below, and mostly organized by people from the global south to unite and build infrastructures of communication and collaboration and solidarity between their movements. So that happened in Tunis, Tunisia, which is where one of the most successful Arab Spring revolutions took place. That is actually, the World Social Forum process has been going on for about a decade, if not a little bit longer. That's for global movements, and there's actually a counterpart here in the US called the US Social Forum. And the US Social Forum was actually created about halfway through the process that's like already happened. It was like, 5 to 8 years ago, where a bunch of American participants of the World Social Forum were basically told by their counterparts there in the World Social Forum. The World Social Forum slogan is "Another world is possible." And a bunch of the participants of the World Social Forum basically looked at the US delegates and said, if another world is possible, another US is necessary. You need to go home and do something about what's happening in your country and change it. And that is the point of the US Social Forum. The US Social Forum is happening June 24th through the 28th in as many as 3, but at least 2 places. It's polycentric this year. And so it's happening in San Jose, California, like the Bay Area, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then Jackson, Mississippi. And Cooperate Jackson is actually the group that I referenced is one of the key sort of hubs for that. I heard a rumor that one is being canceled, which is terrible because that one was mostly based on the solidarity economy. But I also saw a post on Facebook today from Cooperate Jackson saying they come to the US Social Forum in Jackson. So I think it's still happening, but all of them are happening over that same, it's like the last weekend in June. So if you can make it to San Jose, Jackson, Mississippi, or Philadelphia, I highly recommend you go. So those sorts of things are happening. And then from the 13th to the 14th in June, in Paris, there's a meeting of this kind of like broad coalition of groups that are organizing around the Paris Summit, because the Paris Summit, the COP21 will be 2 weeks. And the first week will be week of like the summit where it's like mostly like people learning and sharing from each other, and the second week of the People's Summit will be action-based, and they'll be trying to take direct actions against the summit. I've probably signed this thing like 3 times already.
If you haven't signed in the last week or 2, you haven't signed, she's had more than 1.
I signed it on Sunday.
Okay, then you're okay.
And so, yeah, the COP21 is just going to be this massive like gathering. There'll be thousands of people in Paris, and there will be a summit just very much like the People's Summits, but it's going to be 2 weeks long instead of 1 week, so there'll just be that many more people, that much more happening. There are days of action, and like a lot of these things are kind of getting closer and like happening in and around Paris now, so that we can kind of build those local networks. But there are several like days of action throughout the year where people are asking to do like local climate actions that are kind of, these disjointed actions about whatever is important locally, because the problem with like doing global actions is like it's hardly the case that any one thing could be done in multiple places all over the world and actually have relevance there. So people kind of need to like have that creative like flexibility to do something different in all these different places. But yes, there's going to be lots and lots of things happening on the way up to it's called the road to COP21.
What is the possibility of communication, direct communication with the UN group to have input? Are these things just running parallel and you hope that somehow they're aware of it? But is the message really getting across to the people who are the decision makers?
I mean, that's a great question. Do your messages get across to your lawmakers? Like,
well, at least they can talk to them.
Yeah, you can. And like, it's just like, it's kind of that sort of relationship where like you can deliver the message, and whether or not it's like processed, internalized, and actually like has an impact on any of the like official things that are already happening, it's kind of a crapshoot. And in lots of the global South countries, the representatives and the delegates who go to these gatherings, these UN gatherings, are like from social movements and or like really close in communication, actually genuinely supportive of them. But from a lot of the countries that matter in the UN and in the like international community, those folks have the ear or their ears are held by money, and in lots of ways it's. Being at the People's Climate Summit was like both deeply inspiring and like just amazing to like look at the future and like what's possible, but also like deeply depressing, because there's just kind of understanding that like it does not matter what happens out here. Like those people have made up their minds and like made it up like years ago. The decisions were made, the pieces were put in place, the like bribes were paid, the like investments were made, and right now it's just kind of like icing and it's window dressing. Because a lot of the really key parts of the agreements that in the framework that will come out of the COP21 and be heralded as like our, like salvation for the planet, are already decided. And in lots of ways, this is just kind of tweaking some of the language to make things more or less, concrete. And in lots of these things, I think that the idea is that this isn't going to impact the actual decision, but this will have prepared the global movement that's needed. This is kind of like flexing those muscles so that more and more it's possible to act on those ways outside of state infrastructures, so that people can have relationships to other people and not governments to other governments. And the idea is that we know that those infrastructures and the governments are going to eventually fail at their jobs and not be able to actually maintain order, and it'll be up to the kinds of organizations that exist already and are equipped to manage people and like work with the natural resources and provide for themselves, that will actually need to be built up. So it's a useful thing to build parallel structures, because if the two things build parallel and one falls over, the other one's not impacted. That's right.
I think we're going to have to stop, though, if Roshan wants to stick around and talk. We have folks all the way from Boulder to Castle Rock here tonight, so some folks really promised to end at 9. So let's thank Roshan again for